We are back with you in the Element Well studio. We welcome now to the program in the studio, it's Representative Lloyd Roberson and also Representative Kent McCarty. And so welcome to the program, gentlemen. Thanks for coming in on the middays. So it looks like we're addressing the formula that is utilized to fund education in the state, public education in the state of Mississippi, K through 12 specifically. And I guess I'll start out by just pointing out, once again, for the benefit of the audience, that when you look at the general fund budget, the spending by the state of Mississippi on a K through 12 education, it ranks as the top object in terms of monies received from the general fund, roughly one half of our budget. I think maybe just slightly north of one half of our budget. What, 2.2, 2.3 billion, right? You guys are shaking your heads. So, all right. So, but the formula is, it's a little Byzantine. The current formula is one way to explain it. And it looks like you guys have got some legislation that would possibly change that. So, Rob, what do you think?
Thank you for having us here. We're really excited about this. The bottom line is that for 32 years we've had a formula that, in my opinion, it has become a little top heavy, and I think we need to have some conversations about how to change it. And we think this bill does that. We have something called the Inspire bill. The bottom line here is that we have a $6,650 base that we've come up with, and then there are weights added to that after you start with that base, and the weights are going to be set up for English learners. If you're a school district that's dealing with a lot of first-time English learners, you're going to get a weight added to that number. We've got set up to where if you have gifted children, you're going to have a weight added to that. If you've got a child that has some disabilities, we've got it tiered 1, 2, and 3. Those tiers are set up so that if you're dealing with a child with, let's just say, their minor problems, it's weighted at one level. At the top end, it's 175% weight. At the highest end, and that weight is set up so that the school districts will be able to handle that child and whatever needs that they may have. We have a sparsity element to this. If you have children that are living in a district that have a lot of space where you have to have buses with dealing with fuel, dealing with the everything that comes along with having a vehicle that has to drive very far, there is an element. One of the things that I think make this really good is that we're going to the actual number of kids that are enrolled in that school, instead of this antiquated idea that if for 3 or 4 days out of the year, we're going to count these kids. The school district still has to deal with those numbers of children that are enrolled in that school. So we're going to an enrollment instead of an antiquated system that basically says, hey, we're not going to fund you unless they can all show up, and God help you if you have a flu epidemic that hits at that point. So the elements of what we're trying to do are to update where we are today. There's a CTE part of this, and for old folks like me, that's vocational. So we're going to weight these things, give the school districts the ability to go out here and really have an opportunity to understand what the legislature expects out of them. You know, that's the way money should flow. We should be allocating money to a system that tells the school districts, hey, we're going to give you weights and money to go out here and achieve a goal, and the accountability model should reflect that. And we really haven't been doing that in the past.
So this is somewhat different than the present I say old, it's actually present, but it has been around a while, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. Also, Rob, I think you covered all the various factors that receive additional weight, but I think one of them is income, right? I think there's an income weight as well.
There's an income element. I'm sorry, I missed that one.
No problem.
There is an income element. If you live in a district that's 35% low income, you're getting a weight for that. So one of the things that Kent and I actually talked about when we started looking at this, we want to make certain that the children in the poorest districts are getting adequate money for their education. If there's one thing that I can say that is our top priority, it's twofold for me. One is going to be children that are poor. The other is going to be children with special needs.
Okay.
Those are my two primary factoring in of how we're going to approach this. The reality is that you have school districts that haven't been incentivized to go out and make sure that we're making IEPs available for children with special needs.
Okay.
And the poor children, we have lobbyists that come to the Capitol every day for corporations and everything else. You know what kind of lobbyists we don't show up? Poor children. We don't have anybody coming in, and we are that. In my opinion, we're that guard dog. We're supposed to be out here working for those kids, and if there's an underdog out there, I promise you I'm going to show up for them.
Okay. All right, so Kent, tell us how this differs from MAEP. Representative Roberson did a good job of outlining all the various weights that are added on. First, the base cost goes up $50, I think. Is that right? From $6,600 to $6,650.
Yeah, so the base cost in this legislation is $6,650. The base cost in MAP, the way it's calculated now, is through a formula that there's a lot of different things that go into that formula, but basically the front end of MAP spits out a number. That would be your base student cost number. And then the legislature has always funded, and not always, but with the exception of 2 years, has funded the actual has actually funded education at a level below that number. Still, the number that we've been funding it at is lower than the $6,650 that's the base student cost in this legislation. So this would represent a substantial increase. I mean, I think I'm okay to say that a substantial increase in what we're spending in education. It's just what happens to it once it gets there is a little bit different, and that's the part of it we like to focus on. The part of it that is, again, like the Chairman mentioned, why we have worked on this bill is to try to address some of those inequities on the allocation side of it. So, that to me is the feature of this bill, I guess, that excites us most, is that we've got an opportunity to invest in some districts that don't have a lot of property. They're not property-rich districts. They've got a lot of poverty in their district. Things like that, because obviously a key component to education funding in Mississippi is property taxes on the local side, and then obviously the state support as well. So that's again, kind of the key differences, I think, are on, if you look at a graph of the way that MAP allocates money to districts, which districts benefit. If you look at a graph of the way this plan does, they're very different. And I think if you look at the plot of what we're looking at as far as which districts see the most benefit, it's a direct correlation to those districts that are higher need. So I think that's the part of it that we're, I guess, the biggest difference that we're the most excited about kind of addressing. For the audience, explain the present formula vis-a-vis the local responsibility, the 27%, the 28 mills. I think that a lot of people they gloss over that aspect of it. Explain that for the folks. Yeah, and that's easily one of the most frustrating, I guess, parts of addressing things with MAP is that we do have what we call the 27% rule. So basically, districts may contribute up to 27% of their adequate education funding from their local money. So that number, just to be honest, was just kind of invented, I think, back in when MAP first was developed as like a political, where can we set this number? And the speaker, Speaker White has mentioned several times his desire to kind of attack that number and addressing some of the inequity in our education funding. Mm-hmm. The way we've kind of done that, the 27% rule is still a part of this bill, but it covers all of the state, all of the education spending for that district. So right now there are things that are carved out of that number. This covers all of the expenses that go into operating a district, which again does a little bit to chip away at that inequity that is inherent in setting a cap at what districts can contribute and cannot contribute. Okay, so but it's 27% or 28 mills, right? That's correct. Explain that. Whichever is lower. So. Right. A district can tax at 28 mills, and that can be. I thought you were jumping. That's just an ad valorem formula. That's the millage, yeah. Right, or the 27% of the funding, whichever is less, and the district gets to go with whichever. And the part that people don't really understand sometimes is a meal in Leland, Mississippi, is not the same as a meal in Starkville. I'll use my area for that example. And people have got to understand that what we're attempting to do is kind of bring this into some fairness and give those poorer districts that opportunity. If it were up to me, we would be looking at raising that millage up
to a different level if it were left up to Rob. But the bottom line here is that we're kind of stuck with what we've got, and we're doing everything in our power to make certain that those lower districts, or the districts that don't have a high income, we're able to get that money to them.
And the districts also, they have the discretion of contributing more. It's just the minimum, but they can actually add. And so the more affluent districts typically do.
That's exactly right.
All right, we're coming right. You guys can hang around. There's more to talk about here. We got Rob Roberson and Kent McCarty, members of the Mississippi House of Representatives. We're talking about the new education funding formula they're working on. Stay with us. We're back in the Element Well studio. We've got Representatives Rob Roberson and Kent McCarty. So we're talking about the funding formula. It's crazy we even have a formula if you think about it, but it's necessary because talking about education. Now, just let me clarify: K through 12 education for those that weren't listening or tuned into the last segment. But our state, Rob, is unique. I think maybe more than any other state, which is why anytime you look at these policies that are affect so many, so sweeping, so impactful. Healthcare is one. Education is one. Everybody is impacted by that. Every community, every county is impacted by it. But we have a significant disparity of affluence, of, like you said, of property values, which on all states, honestly, are the primary source of revenue for public education. And so what we end up with is really high-quality schools, sometimes adjacent, district-wise. I mean, just a border, right? An A and an F, side by side. Does that not exist in the state of Mississippi?
And 1,000% it exists. The crazy part to me is we're one of the few states in the nation that put 75% of the school budget, supposedly, into education. Most of the other states use their property tax, and if you're a wealthy state and a wealthy community that can do that, God bless you. What we have is a situation where the state has to put in 75% of that budget. Now, there's a reason for that. We're 3 million people approximately, and we have a very poor state. I love it when people try to equate us to Alabama or another state with larger populations. Alabama has twice the population. It's not the same. And whenever we get and start digging into this, we have to understand that we're providing when we talk about a minimum impact on education, that's what we're doing. The school districts that do have plenty of money, they're able to support that system far better. But we have got to do a better job of allocating that money for these poor districts. Make certain that smart kid in Leland, Mississippi is able to get a good education and be able to take care of his family. You know, here's the funny part to me, and we all talk about brain drain in this state. We talk about it all the time. I can guarantee you one thing. The smart kids that end up going to college, we're not guaranteed to keep those kids. But you want me to tell you who we are keeping? All of the children that don't get a good education. They're staying right here in our state. No doubt about it. We have got to fight to keep those kids as educated as we can and give them something to do. Give them a purpose. You know, my mom and dad used to tell me, he said, they would say, Rob, I don't care what you do, as long as you go out here and God has a purpose for you. These kids deserve a purpose too, and if it's left up to the legislature and the ed committee that I currently have, I think that's what we're trying to do.
Kent, the vast majority of our workforce doesn't come from our colleges and universities. The other states are benefiting from them. We're subsidizing the other states. Now, I agree with the governor, and I think you guys would agree with me as well. The solution to that is to bring more capital investment and business into the state, which I think we're making much progress there. So there is a place for them to work. They don't leave necessarily because they want to get out of Mississippi. It's like, well, you know what I just got educated for, there are no jobs for in the state. Well, that's got to come from the job providers, the job creators. So I think we're making a lot of progress towards that. But to your point, most of our workforce comes from the folks that get educated in our K through 12 public schools.
100%. The one of the things that I heard this morning, and actually I do this already, but somebody was talking that we have about 80 or 90% of our kids actually start college, and then in 5 years, only 10 or 20% end up graduating.
Yeah.
We're doing a great
job.
Huge dropout. We end up setting these kids up for failure, and some of these kids are they're not meant to go to college. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's nothing at all wrong with that. We should be setting these kids up to go. If they want to do air conditioning work, or if they want to work on cars, you know what? That's a wonderful purpose, and that's a great way to make a living.
Agreed.
And we should be touting that and making certain that our school districts are helping these kids understand that. Now, I'll tell you something that just absolutely drives me crazy is whenever I go and I give cash, and then the kid ends up having to put it in a calculator to figure out how to give me my change back. There's little things like that we could be doing that are just so important, first of all, for their self-esteem, but secondly, giving them an opportunity when they finish high school here in the state of Mississippi. There is no reason that we shouldn't have some minimal idea of what how to make sure they're balancing their checkbook. These are things that are, to me, are low-hanging fruit that we should be absolutely doing. So
what about you guys dropping some legislation that would require that in schools?
Hang on.
Okay.
We're getting there.
So Kent, something I've observed, and this isn't across the board in our state, but in many of the communities where we have high-performing public schools, we also have an abundance of private schools. Think about that. And it's I think because of affluence to a great extent, these are families that have just chosen. They want to go to private schools. And to some extent, they're also the ones that are shouldering the majority of the local taxes that are funding the public schools, though their kids are going to private schools. You could argue they're subsidizing the public schools because they're not really consuming services from the public schools. Their kids are going to private schools. Where I live here in Madison, I think you could pretty much look at that. There are a number of, in the area, high-quality private schools, very high-quality public schools in my county of Madison. But gosh, right next door to the south is Jackson, where it's a dismal failure. And it's sad. And it's because if you look at the assessable property in the city of Jackson, you can't get enough money to even have proper buildings, appropriate buildings. I traveled through Jefferson Davis County last year. I think it was Jefferson Davis County. I spoke at an event in Natchez. I think I traveled through Jefferson Davis County. I got to tell you guys, I was appalled at what those buildings look like, those public schools. And that's one of our poorest counties, I believe. That's just, and I think about, wow, the schools I have in my county as a result. And they're essentially, to a great extent, just because of the affluence. This formula tends to normalize that more than the existing formula. Is that a fair thing to say, Kent?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this formula, in my opinion, seeks to address those issues entirely that you just mentioned. Those districts that, are more property rich, that do have more local resources, where they're able to, build and maintain. They've got not only that, but they've got the ability when they do, bond issues, they've got the ability to access a lot more, a lot more capital for buildings and things like that.
Good point.
A lot of communities, we've seen recently that have tried to do these bond issues or any kind of, local raising of funds, and they're unable to get them to pass. So
can't get bonded.
We're working on that right now in Lamar County. There's I think going to be some talk about doing that to build some more facilities because we're just growing so fast. But some of these other counties that aren't growing, that just have old buildings, they've got no real way to do that, to get that money, in order to build new facilities. So one of the things that we wanted to address with this is making sure that the new money we put into education, so anything, all the money that went over and above what we've funded them out in the past, was as best as we could without, just picking arbitrary numbers, made as most sense as we could make with it, but also went to the schools that needed it the most. So those schools that don't have a big property base, where raising a mill might not be worth anything to them.
Right.
They might not have any other access to money. This formula would address that in ways that in MAP, I don't think it really seeks to do that.
To those who say, well, we have too many school districts. We need to think about consolidation in some places. We have too much money not getting its way into the classroom, but rather going to back office admin. What do you say to that, Rob?
We have a portion of this bill that basically says we're putting a committee together to allow us to go look at those things, go find out what school districts don't have enough population to support a school system, what school districts are in the D and the F areas that we could look at and do some things. I think we're going to have our community colleges and our colleges get involved in this issue. You know, we could go to the Delta, and I've got a bill right now that I'm trying to get Delta State interested in trying to put a school district out there on their university policy.
Okay. Well, I'll make one final comment on that. I just wonder if we shouldn't take the A districts and set them side by side with the low-performing districts and go through all the various characteristics and attributes and see, well, why aren't you doing it like this? Like admin cost and number of this, that, and the other. You know what I'm saying? All the various operational aspects.
Right.
Appreciate you guys coming in.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
work.
You so
Thank
much.
you.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it. Coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth Studio.